Hello, my name is Andrew Penny and I've been on the music staff at Hymers College since 1977. This main hall, built in 1892, is a fantastic example of its kind and I think we should have a good look around. Here are two portraits, one of Charles Gore, the first headmaster, and one of Dr. John Hymers, the founder of the college, who left the bulk of his fortune in the 1880s to found and endow a grammar school in Hull. Unfortunately, his homemade will was successfully contested and his younger brother Robert inherited. However, the intention of the will was clear, even if it was not correctly drawn, and Robert immediately gifted £40,000 to carry out his brother's wishes, which is why Robert's portrait is also here at the opposite end of the hall. And here is the portrait of Robert Hymers. And you can also see the bell pull attached to the division bell, or as we know it, the field bell, which is called generations of pupils in from the field to school. The plaque reads, "The College Division Bell. The college bell was ordered by Messrs. Botterill, Son and Dilson, architects, of Hull, at a cost of £16, 18 shillings and fourpence, and installed in September 1892 by Messrs. Marsden and Hodson, builders. Its diameter is 22 inches and its weight 200 weights, 1/4 and 7 pounds. The note is G sharp. It is inscribed John Taylor, Founders, Loughborough, 1892. The bell and the clock, which had stopped for over 20 years, were cleaned and restored in September 1984 during the headmastership of Mr. B.G. Bass by Mr. D.V. Stipetic of Hull. The hall is in the form of a triforium. You can see that it is an interior gallery on 3 sides, opening onto the tall central space at an upper level. The wonderful vaulted wooden roof is remarkable and is mirrored in the Memorial Hall, built much later. If you remember the film of all those birthday cards that were recently sent to Captain Tom Moore when they were all laid out in the Great Hall of Bedford School, you will recognise that other public schools used the same design. Dulwich and Haileybury, for example. Before we leave the balcony, take a look at this. One of the spindles is the wrong way up. The Victorian builders deliberately incorporated a mistake into some feature to show that only God is perfect. I bet many a bored student during assembly has looked up here and never noticed that. This is my first memory of this hall, sitting here and looking down where the grand piano and a violinist were playing. I was a young member of the audience at a concert in the 1960s, which was given by violinist Ralph Holmes, who was in the junior school here from 1947 to 1949. He became a very famous player indeed, and had come back to his old school to give a charity concert. So let's go down this imposing staircase. At this point, many years ago, I had the idea of placing the small choir here for the remembrance service. They were heard unseen and it produced the most magical effect. And that's been used many times since. I may not have been the first to have the idea, but it soon became a regular feature after that. As I make my way across the floor, I want to show you a series of marks. These screws were put into the floor by Peter Hopkinson, one of the porters from many years ago, and they're markers to show where to put the chairs for assembly. I've used them myself many times to check the audience chairs for concerts. There is the west door and the suites of offices. From left to right, the deputy heads, the head secretary's office, reception, and the general office is how many people will remember the layout. Except now, it is the head secretary's office and reception, the general office, and the deputy heads. I pointed out to the head secretary, Michelle, the other day, that she is the first woman ever to sit where previous headmasters always had their desks. These honours boards are interesting. Names and successes from generations long gone. They also show links to Cambridge University, where John Hymers studied. This one is particularly interesting. I remember this large crack occurring during a concert with ear-splitting effect during a particularly loud choral note. Down this side of the hall are portraits of 6 headmasters who all in different ways left their mark on the education of boys and later boys and girls at Hymers College. Remember the portrait up on the balcony? That was Charles Henry Gore, the first head from 1893 through the First World War to his retirement in 1927. That is 34 years, an incredible period of service. He was succeeded by William Victor Cavil, who served from 1927 to 1951, a bluff, uncompromising fellow by all accounts, who seems to have ruled with firmness, shall we say. He had to deal with running the school through the Second World War, of course. Here is Harry Roach. If William Victor was the archetypal believer in sporting prowess and encouraging the flannelled fool and muddied oaf, then Harry was the cultured classicist with an altogether softer touch. I actually knew him as he took up the violin at an advanced age and joined a Saturday morning music school I was in as a young clarinet player. Quite a progressivist, Mr. Roach, introducing current affairs chats with the sixth form and Russian for the bright ones. He served for 20 years. John Ashurst was appointed in 1971 and stayed for 12 years. Almost straight away, he had to deal with the ending of the direct grant system, which determined whether schools like this were incorporated into the state system or went wholly independent, along with the hard-working governing body that saved the school, really. You can see Ashurst's memorial if you look around you. It was he who put the glass panels in the hitherto solid doors so he could see how well his staff were doing at quelling riots in the classrooms. He introduced girls to the school, and another important decision Mr. Ashurst made was to appoint me to do 3 hours a week of woodwind teaching in 1977. But let's move on to Brian Bass. I like Mr. Bass. He was very supportive of the music in school and made the school gradually co-educational. Brian Bass appointed Tim O'Byrne as head of music, and together we created the modern music department, really. There were 2 academic teachers of music, with singing brought to the fore. I headed up 16 specialist instrumental teachers who visited the school each week to teach our students on a rotational basis. There were 3 orchestras, 3 wind bands, brass ensembles, string groups, choirs of all types, the list goes on. Everything Hymers has achieved musically since the 1980s, and it has been a lot, began with Brian Bass. Here is his successor, appointed after only 7 years, John Morris. Brian Bass was at this time the only head to leave Hymers and go on to another job. He was headhunted to lead the City of London school out of trouble. John Morris had arrived as head of history, became deputy head, and then headmaster in 1990. He was a fine academic, a good sportsman, and carried on what Bass had started, really, and developed the school even further in very changing times. The introduction of computers and then mobile phones had an enormous effect on the way young people behaved to each other, and John faced it all head on. An immensely likeable chap, his sense of family at home transferred to the school, I think. The phrase Hymers family was born. After 16 years, John retired and David Elston was appointed. It was he who made a lot of people in Hull realise what was hidden here off the Spring Bank. He made sure that a great many people outside the school knew about it and used our facilities, be it for sport, culture or education. Consequently, this had an effect on applications and numbers of pupils. He retired in 2019 after 13 years and was replaced by Justin Stanley, who, like Harry Roach, is a classicist, and like Morris and Bass, a cultured all-rounder who was very interested in sport. I think all heads need to be that nowadays, as well as educationalists. Of course, the greatest of all the headmasters here is Mr. Stanley, because at the time of this recording, he's decided to keep me on the staff, for the moment. But where will they put his picture when he retires? Well, I hope that's a problem we don't have to deal with for a very long time yet. I'm going to close with a couple of readings, and I think I'll do them from the headmaster's chair. The poet Sean O'Brien was a pupil here in the 1960s. He became Professor of Creative Writing at Newcastle University. And in his time at Hymas, it clearly meant something to him, as he has written about this place, in poems and in his novel, Once Again Assembled Here, which is a cracking read, by the way. Here is an extract from Latinists. The four names at the start are members of the staff I know or knew well. Laurie Trueauthor, Gerald Thompson, Felix was the deputy head, Norman Walker, and Windy was David Gale. It's the only poem I know that uses the word phenomenologically, as the writer tries it on with the weary teachers. Trueauthor, Gerald, Felix, Windy, I see you ascending the stairs from the main hall to heaven, a place which I now understand is the school's upper floor, only bigger. Ascending through clouds in the era of pre-dustless chalk to that rarefied zone where even if is absolute. As the organist stumbles once more through the last verse of Lord, receive us with thy blessing, you go with the rags of your gowns still about you, stacks of North and Hillard in your arms, making for your far-off rooms to wipe the board and start again with the verb for I carry, the noun meaning table. I go to every room at once and I still cannot listen, remember or scan, and the table's still strapped to my back. When you ask me again what the subject might be in this sentence, I still cannot answer. O'Brien, it's not the full stop, and still make the foolish suggestion that, sirs, in a sense, there is none, phenomenologically speaking, that is. When the stare you award me takes longer than Rome did to flower and vanish, I notice the bells are not working in heaven today. There's a line in that poem, which is the first line of a hymn, Lord, receive us with thy blessing. The second line gives O'Brien the title of his novel, Once Again Assembled Here. Maybe he and others had to sing that many times in assembly in this hall. So finally then, a description of this room from O'Brien's novel, which is a great read even if you're not fascinated by the references to Hymas, or Blake's as he calls it. Let me describe the place, Blake's. The main school building, the tall red brick and masonry ship, a church in light disguise is still moored against the field, with the various smaller additions, the restored memorial hall, labs, a sports hall, the library, and even nowadays a theatre or performing arts centre, though the memorial hall was good enough for our productions, clustered around its foot like a town about a castle. In the official history, I shall note these recent developments as signs of Blake's readiness to meet the challenge of the future while cherishing the inheritance of the past. As if I were writing a script for one of those grim look-at-life shorts we used to yawn through at the cinema while waiting for the shooting to start. The central thing is still there, the main hall with the classrooms opening off it on three sides of two floors beneath a hammer beam roof. Everything passes through that space, gets its warrant from that cold, high-windowed climate of Victorian medievalism. When I walk through it today, it will be empty and silent. The old elongated desks that doubled as benches long gone. Rows of grey stackable chairs in their place. I pause by the foot of the wide staircase, then go up to the balcony and along to the far corner to what used to be the history classrooms and the adjacent book room where Captain Carson held court. Thanks for watching. Next time you're in this room, think about all those events that have taken place in this space over the last 127 years. Yes, there have been thousands of assemblies, careers evenings, parents' evenings, but how about the ball held here after the opening in 1893? Solemn assemblies when the deaths of former pupils were announced in 2 world wars. A great party for the armistice when this hall was bedecked with flags and huge tables groaning with food filled the floor. Dinners to welcome and say farewell to headmasters, old Hymerian dinners, and some very bad behaviour indeed. Tremulous naughty boys waiting to be beaten over there in former days, thankfully long gone. Concerts, theatrical productions, charitable assemblies when thousands of pounds were presented to deserving causes. Hours and hours of examinations taken in here and the surrounding classrooms, which determined careers of thousands of pupils. Memorial services to pupils taken from us far too early. Joyful Christmas carol concerts when the singing made the rafters ring. For myself, I have been part of over 100 Christmas concerts alone in here. You can get fed up with "O Come All You Faithful," you know. My favourite moments? Standing here and looking through the open door to Memorial Hall and seeing my son, aged 10, lay the junior school wreath on Remembrance Day. Hearing my daughter's voice in a solo here would be any parent's favourite moment. And then conducting The Armed Man by Carl Jenkins for the school's 125th birthday, when one of my former pupils, Corinne Stead, who you know as Mrs. Cook, sang her heart out in 3 solo sections. We had an enormous choir of pupils and a professional orchestra with many of my friends and colleagues playing. One of the many great events in this great hall. If only these walls could talk.